as much as I absolutely 100% believe my father was called to be a minister, he was a fantastic preacher. I mean, the man could hold a room like you would not believe. And he was very good with the people in our community and the people in our church. He did drink and smoke publicly, partied with the firemen in town. And we lived in sort of a blue collar community. And I think that endeared him to people because, they were like, the minister's drinking with us, so it's okay,
Okay.
And so he was sort of the life of the party. Everyone called him the Rev. He wasn't just Reverend, he was the Rev, and I mean, to the extent where he had hats with that on it and t-shirts, this was who he was. He was the Rev. And
you're listening to When God Intervenes, the podcast where faith, hope, and healing come together for families with a loved one battling addiction. I'm back. I'm Daryl Rogers. I'm your host. Welcome to another episode of When God Intervenes. So glad that you're listening today. And today I'm honored to have a guest on, Jessica Morris. And Jessica and I have a lot of things in common. We're both PKs, both preachers' kids. And Jessica has a story about addiction and recovery she's going to share with us today, and just tell us about her journey and how she came to the place that she is now with the work that she does. And so good to have you here, Jessica.
Thank you, Daryl. I'm honored to be with you this morning.
Well, first of all, tell us where you're from. Where are you now? Where are you located?
Today, I live in just in a little town outside of Reading, Pennsylvania, which is, for those of you who don't know, is the Reading Railroad on the Monopoly board, is the first claim to fame. But we're about an hour north of the Philadelphia area. So southeastern Pennsylvania. And I've lived here, actually, this is the longest I've ever lived anywhere in my life. So I guess you could say I'm really, even though I'm a Jersey girl at heart, because I grew up in New Jersey, I'm a Pennsylvanian. I don't even know if that's the correct term, but.
Sounds good to me. We'll go with it.
Yeah.
Okay. So you grew up in New Jersey, and what was life like growing up?
That's a loaded question, Daryl. Okay, so how much time do you have? It was actually, I will say, I grew up in the 70s. I was born in 1970. So the world, not just New Jersey, but the world was a completely different place than it is today. A lot of outside playing as a kid, especially because the inside of my home was pretty toxic. And so we went out a lot, as kids. I'm the youngest of four. And so, I was the brat of the family. And I will say for sure that I was a brat. I was very spoiled in the sense that often got my way because I cried, but I think that's a lot of the youngest child probably could identify with that, no matter what kind of family they're in. But my father was a minister and my mother was a school teacher. We lived in a very small town, no traffic lights or anything. There's a truck stop way up at the end of town, and that was pretty much the only outsiders that ever came in, really. And my dad he was a minister and he was also an alcoholic. And my mother's father was an alcoholic and my father's father was an alcoholic. And so and there were some other addictions sprinkled in there that were never identified, but I know now, looking back, were there. And so there was a lot of dysfunction. There was a lot of family lineage of dysfunction. So like, this is how it's always been. So this is how it is, and just deal with it, sort of, kind of attitude. My mother was raised in an alcoholic family. She became a very good codependent, enabling wife and minister's wife, even to the extent that I'm sure you understand. There's, a look that needs to happen when you're a
Mm.
minister's family. And that is not easy to uphold when things in the home are not good. And as much as I absolutely 100% believe my father was called to be a minister, he was a fantastic preacher. I mean,
Mm.
the man could hold a room like you would not believe. And he was very good with the people in our community and the people in our church.
Mhm.
He did drink and smoke publicly, partied with the firemen in town. And we lived in sort of a blue collar community. And I think that endeared him to people because, they were like, the minister's drinking with us, so it's okay,
Oh, wow. Okay.
and so he was sort of the life of the party.
Mm.
Everyone called him the Rev. He wasn't just
Okay.
Reverend, he was the Rev,
Uh-huh.
and I mean, to this extent where he had hats with that on it and t-shirts, I mean, this
Wow.
was who he was. He was the
Mhm.
Rev.
Mhm.
And he was fun and until the doors were closed and we were in the house.
Mm.
And there was a lot of abuse that I will not get into, major details of
Okay.
that because this is not about that. But it was scary to grow up in the home. I thank God every day that my eldest sister, who's 6 years older than I am, took on the protection of me. And I know that was probably a little bit of hero complex because if you know anything about the dysfunctional
Mhm.
family, the eldest
Mhm.
child tends to be the hero. But I don't even care what complex it was. I'm very grateful for her. She practically raised me, and because my parents were fried by the time I came along. My father was my mother especially. I mean, there was just try to imagine, she was a full-time teacher, 4 kids, and a husband who was spending money like a drunken sailor,
Uh-huh.
and so on a minister and teacher salary. And I look back at the things my mother held together in our family and it blows my mind. It really does.
Mm.
I mean, it's
Mhm.
amazing what a person can do in that type of situation. The human spirit it's just phenomenal. And so it was a hard upbringing. My addiction of food has been with me since I can remember remembering. I I don't even know how else to say it. Every memory of my child, food is connected in one way or another.
Mhm.
Um, and alcoholism came into the picture pretty young as well. I just didn't know it. I
Okay.
always knew there was something wrong with me in regards to
Mhm.
food. I
Mhm.
didn't know, or I should say, I denied there was anything wrong with me in regards to alcohol until I actually got into recovery. Because my father was an alcoholic, and therefore, if I was an alcoholic,
Mm.
then I was in big trouble because that meant I
Mm.
had to hate myself. Because for a very long time, I hated my father
Right.
for his alcoholism. So while the food addiction was easy for me to accept when I finally did get to recovery, the alcoholism I was sober for more than a year before I could even admit that I was an alcoholic.
Okay.
It
Wow.
took a lot of work. So that's
Mm.
a very long answer to what was it like growing up.
Yeah.
I will also just put in there one other thing that our family did laugh a lot. There was a lot of laughter. There was a lot of my mom was really big on holidays and birthdays. I mean, if it was your birthday, you knew it was your birthday. I'm never, I've heard people, in fact, my husband, when I did a birthday, I got an ice cream cake for my birthdays or for my husband's first birthday when I was with him. And it
Mhm.
was his first birthday cake ever. And
Wow.
and he had had a mother and 2 wives prior to me.
Wow.
And that just blew my mind that
Yeah.
someone would never have a birthday cake. And not in my house, man. When it was your birthday,
Right.
you knew it was your birthday. So there
Yeah.
were a lot of good things mixed in with that
Yeah.
dysfunction. It's
Yeah. That's
important to
always
note
the way
that.
it is, I believe.
Yeah.
It seems that way. Um, I think I think a lot of people have this kind of misconception that preachers don't sin, or that
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
they live this perfect life, because on the exterior a lot of times things look perfect, but they're humans, and
Yeah.
we live in a fallen world. And so you were talking about the really the whole um, generational, if you will, trauma that had been passed along, and that's something that is so common that you see um, it. Um, it's just the norm. It seems like when I talk to families, there's always something. I think there's always a level of dysfunction in every family. It's different things with different families, but yeah, and then like you were saying, you have to, um, as a preacher and a preacher's wife and the family, there's you kind of have that. You have to have that outward persona, right? Whether that's what's going on inside the house or not.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think that there's a message there to people that, hey, if you're a member of a congregation, you need to uh, your pastor is human too, and he needs to be ministered to as well. Um, and you need to understand that being a preacher is a that's a stressful job. It's really really
Well,
stressful.
it makes me think of the disciples.
Mm.
I mean, look at the guys that Jesus picked to
Right,
follow
yeah.
him. I mean, what a bunch of
Yeah,
human beings they were. I mean,
yeah,
they were
that's
so
right.
human, and they fought amongst each other, especially after he ascended, and they had to do
Mhm,
it on their own. They were a mess.
mhm,
And so the expectation that we have today of our ministers is so unfair.
yeah,
And I'm not excusing my father's behavior, but I mean,
right.
even the minister that I have today, I know he's human. I don't expect him to act absolutely perfectly all the time. In
I think
fact, I when I got into doing spiritual direction, I love providing spiritual direction for people in ministry because they don't even know they need it.
right.
Most of the time, it's like, what, your spiritual soul and it needs sustenance just as much as the next person.
Hmm.
And you deserve to have someone sit and listen to you and hold that space for you as
Hmm.
much as the next person does. You do it all week long for everybody else. You and I both know that the minister does not work 8 to 5, and they
Right,
don't just
that's
work
right.
on Sunday. It's a
Yeah,
24/7 job.
that's
Yeah.
right. Speaking of alcoholism, I can remember my dad getting phone calls in the middle of the night, from families who he had to go minister to because the dad or the mom or whoever it was, came home drunk again and was yelling, and there was fighting.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that was a very common thing. But when people see you at church on Sunday morning, they don't know that Saturday night or Friday night you were up all night with his family ministering to them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yet you still have to go deliver a sermon. And yeah, so and I think it's just a natural thing, maybe a human thing, that people tend to put their pastors, they put them up on a pedestal, and they are held to a higher standard, which is understandable. But um, it's almost like they're worshiping the preacher instead of
Person.
worshiping God. Instead of having a relationship with Jesus, sometimes it gets a little bit distorted there. How did you come to the realization that and where were you in life when you take me back to that moment when you realized that I need some help in
Oh.
things or
Well, I knew I needed help for a long time.
mhm,
I was
you
in,
weren't ready to ask?
yeah, I was in and out of counseling, probably for about 10 years
Hmm.
before I got into actual recovery.
Okay.
And the reason I mention that is because I want to give a kudos to all those people. I think they kept me alive. I think those people that I went to see kept me alive. They really didn't have the opportunity to help me, though, because I wasn't being completely honest with them.
Right. Yeah.
Counseling doesn't work if we don't get vulnerable.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I thank God for those people. What happened though is I was let's see, I was 28 years old when I moved to where I'm living now. And I had a professional job. I call it professional because when I got out of college, I did a whole bunch of temp jobs that were sort of all over the place. I didn't really know what direction I wanted to go. In fact, I was mentioning to you before we started, I really just started going in the direction that I've
Uh-huh.
always known I wanted to go just 4 months ago. So
Hmm.
it took me till 55 to recognize this is, really what I want to do. But so I moved to this new city for a new job because I knew I was going to get fired from the old one. And, it was just, we were going down that road. It was going to happen. And my siblings came to visit me in my new apartment in my new city. And they all stayed overnight because they all lived, more than an hour away. And we were drinking, of course. And the next morning when I woke up, only my eldest sister was still there. The other two had left. And I said to her, where are they? Why'd they leave? And she said, because they didn't want to stay to hear what I have to say to you. And I was like, uh-oh, you know? And so I was like, what? But I mean, we had a good time last night. In my head, I was like, what's her problem?
Hmm.
And she basically said to me, she didn't mince words. And she said, I'm not gonna, I watched you drink last night. And I am not going to sit and watch you do to your life what our father did to our family.
Hmm.
And I was annoyed, pissed off, to be perfectly honest with you. How dare she tell me
Hmm.
anything like this? Who does she think she is? She was drinking right along with, all those things were going through my head. And I got her out of my apartment as quickly as I possibly could.
Uh-huh.
And, but that's when I started seeing a new counselor
Hmm.
because I decided to see a new counselor because I'm going to show her, I'm going to show my sister how I don't have a problem with alcohol.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And so, that was probably, I want to say that was about 10 to 12 months before I got into recovery, because what happened was that counselor, for whatever reason, let's just say God came in and changed me. I started to tell her the truth. And I didn't even really know I was telling her the truth until she told me she said, you've been with me almost a year. I've been reviewing my notes of, our sessions. And there's a lot of trauma from your childhood that we need to dive into.
Hmm.
And I thought, okay, here we go. We're going to make it everybody else's fault. Like that's what I
Uh-huh.
was thinking she was going for. And she said, before that happens, though, you're going to have to go get help for your food addiction. And I was like, what? And she said, Jessica, every single time you have come in here, you have talked to me about you cannot stop eating, that you've tried every diet, that you've tried every remedy, you've gone to commercial weight loss programs, you've, made up your own, you've exercised, I mean, at one point I even was working for a commercial weight loss program because I was so successful in their
Hmm.
program. My
Hmm.
weight was very up and down for the first 29 years of my life. And she said, this is an addiction. And until you admit that it's an addiction, until you get help for it, it is always going to be in the way of everything else. And nothing that we do in this room will ever take hold as long as you are still chained to the food the way you are.
Hmm.
And she pointed me in the direction of a recovery program for compulsive overeaters. And I was shocked because I'm paying her $90 a week And she's telling me to go to this place where I only have to put $1 in the basket every time I show up. Like, what is she, nuts? you know? But no, she's not nuts. She knew what she was talking about.
Hmm.
Because when I walked into that first meeting, I wasn't there 5 minutes and I knew, holy crap, am I exactly where I need to be?
Hmm.
I also didn't want any part of it. I wanted out so fast. I just, it freaked me out because honestly, as I was growing up, and I don't know if you remember this in the 80s, they used to do like, what were they called? They were TV movies like once a week. They would do, what the heck were they? Oh, Hallmark Hall of Fame movies,
Okay.
those.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they always, not always, but they often had on girls with eating disorders like anorexia or
Uh-huh.
bulimia. And I used to pray to become anorexic or
Wow.
bulimic so that someone would help me because I knew there was something really wrong with me, but I didn't have what those girls had,
Hmm.
or at least
Hmm.
I didn't think I did.
Hmm.
Because really, what I learned when I went into recovery is that the food addiction manifests in a lot of different ways, but it lives in our brain. That's our brains. I was a volume eater. I mean, I was a volume eater. In fact, I rarely tell people outside the program the amounts of food that I used to put into my system at a time because it grosses them out. Like my husband came to hear my story one time and
Hmm.
he said, I am never going to hear your story ever again. That just completely grossed me out.
Wow.
But but I tell it to a room full of people like me and they totally get it. They're shaking
Hmm.
their heads. Yes, I was there. I did that. Like we eat until we get sick. I mean, it is, you cannot, I could not stop. I could not stop.
Hmm.
And so, where was I going with that? Oh, I can be sitting in that same, what I just explained to you. I can be sitting right next to an anorexic
Hmm.
who restricts her food, who does all kinds of things to control her food intake. And it looks like we're two completely different diseases. We're the
Uh,
exact same disease.
is that right?
It lives here. The way our brains think about food are completely corrupt. Our
Hmm.
brains are
Hmm.
absolutely corrupted in regards to food, body image. I've seen pictures of myself when I remember thinking I was enormous. And
Hmm.
I look so good in those pictures. I cannot believe that I thought I had to lose another 15 pounds or another two.
Right.
I mean, to this day still, I look in the mirror and I really don't trust what I see
Right. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I don't, I'm not sure. I mean, and it's been 25 years that I've been in this program and I still put my food on a scale before I eat it because I
Wow.
know that's my daily admittance of my
Hmm.
powerlessness over this disease.
Hmm.
I can look at, a 72-ounce steak and go, yeah, that looks like it's 4 ounces. I can rationalize anything.
Yeah. Let me ask you this because, you know, I mean, I sort of get it, but I can't fully comprehend it. I can sort of myself, if I'm stressed, if I eat something, I get a dopamine release, right? You
Yes,
will get a
yes.
dopamine
Mhm.
release from that, and it's like comforting. And usually when you're in that situation, it's not the healthy foods you're craving, right? It's the junk
Absolutely,
food.
right.
Am I on track there with some of that? How does that play into it?
Well, yeah, I think it's kind of like alcohol in the sense that normal people do it too,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
It's the extent that I take it in my own
Mhm.
mind,
Gotcha.
physically speaking.
Mhm.
I can tell you, I'll give you probably one of the more gruesome things.
Mhm.
There was a period of time where I had like a go to three, which would mean that I would be eating a bag of potato chips while the frozen pizza was cooking in the oven. And then there would be some sort of ice cream treat or, sugary, icy or something like that
Mhm.
for after.
Mhm.
And I remember there was a period of time where the roof of my mouth was freezer burned because I got those, you remember those little, they probably still have them. I don't look in that section now, but they were like ices that you could spoon out, that you could hold in your hand. It was like a little container. And there sometimes were like 6 in a pack, let's say.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so you're supposed to have one or maybe 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would eat all 6 in like a 10-minute seating. The roof of my mouth was literally blistering from the
Wow.
freeze. And and it hurt. It hurt. I
Yeah.
could not stop myself. Like there
Mm-hmm.
was no, at that point. And I will say it took me a while to get there because, like
Mm-hmm.
I said, my weight has gone up and down my whole life. I would say in the last 4 years of my addiction, there was no going down. There was no more control. It was
Mm-hmm.
gone. And
Mm-hmm.
I was 5'4" and I was almost 300 pounds when I walked in to my first meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nothing inside of me that ever said, "Ooh, I want to be almost 300 pounds."
Right.
Nothing. And
Yeah.
I mean, I was working for a weight loss program. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not that I didn't have the knowledge. I had all the knowledge that I
Uh-huh.
needed in order to eat properly and to exercise properly. But that didn't stop me from eating a pizza and then doing, 4 hours of aerobics in my living room to
Mm-hmm.
try to get those calories. I mean, it was just a all-consuming addiction. On
Yeah.
top of that, and this is where the alcoholism took off for me. I drank a lot when I was in high school. I became the bad girl when I was in high school. I was a straight A student, and then I discovered partying with my friends, and that was that. Um, and what I discovered when I was in college, I tried to become a bulimic so that I could stay thin and still eat everything I wanted,
Mm-hmm.
but I could not make myself throw up.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason, I tried everything. I
Mm-hmm.
learned that if you drink enough, you'll throw up. And
Uh-huh.
so that's when the diseases started to play off of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it spiraled out of control over and over again. And then I would reel it back in. My sister would
Mm-hmm.
say something to me, or my mom, or, somebody would come in and say, I'm a little concerned about your drinking. Or my other sister went to the same college I did, and she was an RA, and she wrote me up once for my drinking, because
Okay.
she was so worried about me.
Uh-huh.
And so I would reel it in so everybody could relax,
Right.
and then I would continue and it would just spiral again. And
Mm-hmm.
so, but what happened at the end is I lost the control of the reeling in that just didn't
Mm-hmm.
exist
Mm-hmm.
anymore. And
Yeah.
so when I went to recovery, the first woman I worked with in the food addiction program told me that the way she worked the program, there was no alcohol allowed in your food plan because alcohol has sugar in it.
Mm-hmm.
And sugar is what we know to be the addictive substance that makes us crave more.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, well, that's okay. I was very self-righteous. That's okay. I don't have a problem with alcohol, like that's not my problem. That's my father's problem.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I say I was sober for over a year before I was able to admit that I was because I was what they call stark raving sober.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was a lunatic. I was,
Uh-huh.
just still living in all of the behaviors, like
Mm-hmm.
the food was right and I wasn't drinking, but I was still crazy, you know?
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah. And so that's when
Yeah.
she sent me to another counselor who
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
we'll talk more about that, I'm sure at some point, but yeah.
Yeah. I've some of the things that you're describing, I have run across quite often. And you're talking about when you were kind of trying to make everybody happy to get them off of your back. And I talk about that a lot because sometimes I will see people go to treatment. I want to give an example here. Young man is in trouble with DWIs, multiple DWIs, and this is a quite common scenario. And so he's got an opportunity to stay out of jail by going to treatment. So he goes to treatment for does a 30-day program, and he comes right back out of treatment, and he goes right back to drinking again, and right back to drinking and driving. And it's like you see the cycle repeat itself over and over and over again. And it's because he's never surrendered and
Right.
said, okay, I can't do this on my own. I need help. And he's not diving into the process of trying to do the work to get better. He's just trying to jump through the hoops. I call it jumping through the hoops to get whatever he needs in that moment, whether it's making family happy or getting, staying out of jail or whatever it is. So yeah, I see that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And the sad part is that, I mean, if you've been around recovery long enough, you know that it's never going to work for a person until they're the one who chooses
Right.
it. They're the one who decides. I mean, I did try going to a couple recovery meetings. I want to say probably about 5 years prior
Mhm.
to me going to the meeting that I just told you about. And I mean, I just sat there and looked at them like these people are crazy,
Right.
and I went to keep,
Yeah.
because my mom suggested it, and I was
Mhm.
like, yeah,
Mhm.
whatever. And my dad actually had found AA, or had, he had gotten recovery. And the problem though is that he was still kind of acting in the same old behaviors. He was sober,
Mhm.
but he had lost his church and he had been kicked out of the ministry. And so this was his way of getting back in, is how I saw it, because he still
Okay.
behaved in a really, like, not treating my mother well, still
Right.
acting kind of crazy with us. And we were all adults then, but he, still that same sort of selfish attitude
Mhm.
that most
Mhm.
addicts have, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like you're trying to conform to what other people wanted from him to be able to get what he wanted, but
Yeah.
not really, doing the internal work that he needed to, and not really
Right.
making those deep changes. Um,
Right.
yeah, and you were talking about earlier about being angry with your sister when she confronted you, and I tell people quite often if they're not angry with you, then you're not really holding the boundaries, like you
Yeah.
should,
Yeah.
or you're not communicating effectively. And I had a mom not too long ago. I think it was on a social media post that I had that she said, I confronted him about or I set some boundaries with him or whatever. And she's like, he hates me now. And I said, well, that's not really him that hates you. That's his addiction, because you're a threat to the addiction now. And it's almost like your child is in there, but that addiction has kind of taken him over. And that's what you're dealing with, or who you're dealing with, when you're seeing that anger and frustration.
Yeah.
Um, you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I think of that night as one of the most loving things anyone's ever done for me,
Mhm. Mhm.
because I know that my sister to this day, she has no children. I believe I'm her child. The way I look at it, she parented
Mhm.
me our
Mhm.
entire growing up life. And to this day, I mean, when I got my master's degree, the picture I have of me standing with her and my mom, in my cap and gown, she looks happier than everybody. She was so beaming with pride for me.
Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
I mean, and I know that was hard for her. I mean, of course, my other siblings wouldn't even do it. They left, and that's not to say anything bad about them. They weren't able to do it. And I think there was something in her that knew, if I don't do this, she's going to die,
Yeah. Yeah.
and because that's the road I was going down. That is
Yeah.
absolutely, I know today that if I hadn't found recovery, or if recovery hadn't found me, I'd be dead.
Mhm. Mhm.
Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because I was
Uh,
already the walking dead. I was not present. I was not living a life.
right. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was just living for the next binge, you know?
Yeah. Boy, you're hitting on a lot of good things there, a lot of good points, and it's just coming at me so fast. I don't know if I could keep up or not. Keep the thoughts in my head here to cover all these, but yeah, you're just talking about how love. Let's talk about love for a second. That's what I was thinking of here. Um, you were saying that that was the most loving thing she could have done, and I know a lot of times parents feel like, or just in general, I think people think of love as, you have to always be agreeable with people, and that's just not true. And some of the most loving acts that we do, or acts of kindness, are when we confront people in love. But you know, that's a very it's a very difficult thing to do. It's difficult waters to navigate because, first of all, you have to check your own heart and check your motives and make sure that you're really doing this, you're really confronting this person out of love, and it's not for selfish gain. Or, if I'm struggling with my self-esteem and I see someone else in error, I may want to pull them down a little bit to make myself feel better, to elevate myself. So I have to check my heart and really dive in deep to go, okay, Daryl, what are your motives here? Are your motives pure? Are you really
Right.
trying to help this person? But if I get past that hurdle and I'm really trying to help this person, now I have the fear of, if I confront them, they're going to reject me, or they're going to hate me, or there's going to be this really ugly conversation that's going to leave me hurt.
Hmm.
And um, we have to, I think, when we really, really love on the deepest level, we're willing to step past that fear to confront that person and take that risk. Maybe you completely lose the relationship, but you've still, you have to. It's just like, really, it's like crucifying yourself in that moment, if you
Yes.
will. That you're like saying, okay, I surrender, I give up everything. Whatever happens to me in this is what happens, but I have to confront this person.
Yep.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely. In fact, as you're talking, I'm thinking of, the line, what Jesus said: "The truth will set you free."
Hmm.
And, the truth hurts a lot
It
of
does,
times.
yeah.
It doesn't matter what it's about, but a lot of times we do not want to hear the truth, because often the truth means I might have to change something.
That's right. Yeah.
And none of us really are fond of that. I'm kind of comfortable where I am right now,
Right.
even though, I'm burning myself and killing myself from the inside, you
Mhm.
know. And so she was telling me the truth. She was saying, "This is what I see. And I'm telling you right now, I'm not going to be a part of it." Like, I've
Mhm.
already, I think she didn't say this, but it was almost like she was saying, "Look, I've already wasted the first half of my life on living with this alcoholic father and
Mhm.
seeing what he's done to our family. I'm not going to sit here and watch you do it for the rest of my life."
Mhm.
I mean, like, this is, she didn't say it in those terms, but that's kind of in hindsight what she was saying. And today, she's not, I wouldn't say that she's thrilled. I mean, I tend to be what they would call a Jesus freak now.
Mhm.
Like, I'm just like, yay,
Mhm.
Jesus,
Mhm.
and she's still got some hurt and pain from, our upbringing. And so
Yeah,
there's no church life for her at this
I
time.
understand.
And, she still sits and listens. She still is excited for me. When I went to seminary, she was still excited for me. She
Mhm.
she she
Mhm.
thought it was weird, but
Mhm.
she was like, "Go for it." I mean, if this is where the path is taking you, and so I she's one person. I'll never forget this. When I first was with my husband, before we were even married, the one thing I have to say about my dad that everybody in my family agrees with is that we're New York Giants fans. He grew up. My parents grew up in Jersey City, and New Jersey. And so New York Giants, that's our thing, man. We could be having an argument, like knock down, drag out argument about politics or religion or something. And somebody brings up the Giants. We're all on the same team. Like this
Okay.
is the one thing we all agree on.
Uh-huh.
So I drive. I've been doing this since I lived in Pennsylvania every Sunday to watch the Giants with my sister because she gets New York TV where she lives in Jersey.
Uh-huh.
Well, when I met my husband and we started to get serious and football season came around and every Sunday I'm driving away, he was kind of, what's going on here? This is not okay with me that every Sunday you're going to be gone. And I decided, of course, I went to the people in my recovery programs and asked them, what should I do? This is my sister. I love her. And they made a suggestion that I compromise with him and that I say, okay, how about if I just go when they play at 1:00 instead of all the games, the 4:00 and the night games, I won't go for those. And he was okay with that. And I was so afraid to tell my sister, and I told her, and you know what she said to me? She said, Jessica, she said, you and I were always okay. That's all you need to know. We're always okay. You do what you got to do in your marriage. We're good. I have to say that other than my husband now, she's the only person in my life that I have ever actually believed those words from. Other people have said them. She's the only one I know deep down into my gut and my soul that she loves me in that unconditional way, that no matter what, we're good.
Yeah. Awesome.
And she'll always love me. I'm getting choked up telling you that. I mean, it is a huge gift for me. I know that because not everybody has that in their life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why I say, I thank God for her because I really do believe I was suicidal in high school and I didn't do it because I was afraid of what it would do to her. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I know that sounds very selfish and self-centered, but it kept me alive.
Yeah.
It kept me alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, it's just a side note here before we move into the next topic. It's interesting that you're a football fan, yeah, because I grew up, I was a huge NFL fan growing up and watched college football and all of that. I never played football. I played baseball in high school, but both of my boys played football and ran track all the way through high school and into college as well. And our youngest one played on the Division II level in college, but our youngest one, he went all the way through,
Wow.
in the football program. But so it was a little bit of an adjustment when our youngest one graduated from college.
I'll
Because
bet.
from
Yeah.
the time they were little playing Pop Warner all the way up, we had been to football game after football game. But just thinking about the growing up as a preacher's kid, I'm trying to think if there's any other things we want to talk about there.
Well, I will just share with you that a lot of my journey with God was really messed up due to that. I mean, a lot of preachers' kids can talk to this, I mean, because we tend to, as little kids, look at our dads as if they are God, to begin with. But then when they're also your preacher, not just your dad, it adds a level there. And when my father told me that I was a mistake, I was very young, and he was probably drunk. I don't know that for sure, but in hindsight, I'm guessing he was probably drunk and annoyed or whatever. And I heard God telling me I was a mistake in that moment. And it took years into my recovery to even say that out loud to someone. Like, I never told anyone that he told me that because I was afraid if other people knew, then they would also know that I was a mistake. And so, because if he said it, God must believe it because he's the minister. So he must know something I don't know. I mean, this is that's the wheels that started turning in my head. And so I will never forget when because I also went to my mom. I did tell my mom after I said, Daddy just, I was so little, I was still calling him Daddy. And so I remember saying to her, Daddy just told me that I was a mistake and that you didn't want me. Is that true? And I'll never forget. It's like it was yesterday. She just took a heavy sigh. She went, huh. And she goes, he should not have told you that.
Mm.
She didn't say, no, that's not true. She just really confirmed it, that
Oh,
they
yeah.
didn't plan me. And I just, I knew I cannot ever let anyone know this. And the counselor that I was seeing, and he was a certified addictions counselor that I started seeing after my first year when I he was stark
Mm.
raving sober.
Mhm.
Um, he very gently led me through a lot of that family trauma work that needed to happen.
Mhm.
And, in group therapy and also individual treatment weekends, it was 4 years of pretty intensive therapy. But at one point, I told him, it was just me and him in his office. And I felt like I need to tell this guy. I'm learning enough to know that you got to tell the truth, and my relationship with God at that point, while it had improved due to my recovery, I still was afraid of God. And so I knew, everything that everybody tells you in recovery is you've got to have a good relationship with your higher power. And
Mhm.
so I decided I'm going to tell him. And so I told him, and he got very quiet. And I explained to him that even later, in when I was a teen, my mother started to try to get me on her side, because my parents
Mhm.
started to split, and they just were fighting all the time. And she told me about a time when she was pregnant with me, and my father beat her to the point where she was bleeding.
Mm.
And I asked her, like, that was the story she told me. And I said, well, did you go
Mhm.
to the hospital? And she said, well, no. And I was like,
Mhm.
well, why didn't you go to the hospital? And she said, well, because the people in the church would find out.
Right.
And what I heard then was that the
Mhm.
people in the church were more important than my life. And
Mhm.
so she didn't say that, but that's what
Wow.
I heard, right?
Mhm.
And so I'm telling this counselor all this information, right? I'm giving him all this. Now we've worked through a significant amount of my childhood stuff. And at this point, and I'm telling him this, and he said to me, I really would like to reframe this for you.
Mhm.
And I said, you know what? Bring it on, Steve, because I am tired. I am tired of this ruling my life. And he said, your dad didn't want you to the point where he beat your mom up so bad that almost got rid of you, let's say.
Mm.
Okay. Your mom confirmed, yeah, I wasn't going to do anything about it because the people in the church would find out. So your human
Mhm.
parents not wanting you here, let's say. Okay. Maybe you're right about that. Maybe that's true. He said, then why are you here? Because the big guy wants you here.
Mhm.
And that's the thing he said to me. I can see his face in him telling me this. That's the thing I want you to focus on,
Mhm.
that God wants you here. There is a reason for you to be here because otherwise you wouldn't be. They did
Mhm.
everything that they could to get rid of you, you know? And I don't know if that's so much true, but because my mom was, for the most part, a really great mom. I mean, we always had everything that we needed in the family. But it did reframe it for me to a place where I was like, well, wait a minute, he's right. If all this stuff is happening and I'm not dying, God must really want, there might be something for me to do here. And
Mhm.
it changed my whole perception
Mhm.
of God, of my relationship with God, of myself, of what I might have to offer to the
Mhm.
world,
Mhm.
that it might be something that's really important, and that was really the first time in my life. I was probably like 35 when he said
Uh-huh.
that to me. That was the first time in my life where I thought, there's really a purpose for me being here.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it
Wow.
changed, and that's when I started to think about seminary, and that's when I started to
Hmm.
like really seek after God like a crazy person. I mean, it was like my hair was on fire. I couldn't get enough books to read. I couldn't talk to people enough. I got chummy, and he actually with the chaplain where I worked, and he actually became my spiritual mentor for like 20 years.
Hmm.
So that sort of like flip of and it wasn't really a flip of the switch. A lot of work happened before that moment, but that was what I would say maybe was my spiritual bottom, was
Hmm.
being able to say that out loud, because it was a
Wow.
secret that I'd been holding my whole life.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Um, Boy, there's some commonalities there. Going back to your sister, I don't know. Some people call it church hurt. I don't know if that's really a good term, but people go to really church. I think of it like a hospital, right? And so sick people are at the hospital, and so if you go to church, you're going to people should be there not because they're trying to impress somebody with their holiness or their spiritual walk,
Right.
but they should be there really looking internally and trying to figure out how what they need to do to heal and to come into a closer relationship with God. But if someone's there for the wrong reasons, they're sick too. I mean, they're sick. I mean,
Yeah.
we're all spiritually broken, and so that would be my message to people who have been to church and who have been disappointed by the pastor or disappointed by other church members or have been somebody lashed out at them. Well, those people are hurting too, and it
Yeah.
doesn't excuse their behavior, but you need to understand that that's not the reason to go to church, and there's that old saying that if you find a perfect church, don't join it because you'll mess it up, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And man, I would encourage people to not allow those bad experiences to prevent you from going to church. Church, I mean, that's separate. Yes, it's separate from your relationship with God. Now, you can
Mhm.
have a relationship with God and be right with God without going to church. However,
Yep.
going to church is an important part of your Christian walk, and
Yeah.
I don't want to see people throw out the baby with the bathwater on that. It's
Yeah.
not about religion for me. It's about relationship with God through Jesus.
Right. And the
Um,
community of people,
yeah,
that he,
absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, Jesus talked about community all the time. He never sent us out by ourselves. He
Hmm.
said, go in groups of two, and that's how it started. And it became, this community of people working and living together, and
Yeah.
he wouldn't have said, and that's one of the reasons I love recovery, is that over and over again, you're told there, you cannot do this by yourself. As
Uh-huh.
soon as you try doing this by yourself, you're getting a red flag that you're doing something wrong.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. And
Yeah.
so when I'm going to church, I'm looking for opportunities to serve other people, and I'm trying to be as so we have in our church, we have discipleship groups, which is just a
Hmm.
really, like, in our discipleship group, there's like five of us.
Hmm.
And then we have community groups, which is a little bit larger, but you know, there's environments there where you can open up and just be really, lay it all on the line. We should be able to do that anyway, but you're in that
Yeah.
safe environment there. And I can't grow spiritually really if I'm just in a cocoon, and I'm not willing to be transparent with people and open up, and it gives opportunity for that to works reciprocally.
Right.
Um, when you were talking earlier about some of the issues, with your dad and everything, I was just thinking about how when we hold things in, it's really damaging for us, and the healing really begins when we're willing to be transparent and we're willing to start talking about some of these things. And man, my dad was I still, think the world of him, and such a good man. But, we're all flawed. The biggest issue that I have with my dad, and I did the same thing to a degree, with my kids. Um, he would yell. He would yell at me, and I couldn't even tell you what he yelled at me about now. But I know it's when he would get stressed out, and I can remember as a little kid, and I hesitate to say these things, because if some of the church members hear this, from going way back, they're going to think, "Wow, I can't believe Daryl would just throw his dad under the bus like that." But he's a human being.
Yeah.
And what I can tell you about him is that while his dad was at church, when my dad was just a little boy, his dad had a stroke at church, and they brought him home, and he still remembered seeing his dad die in the home in front of him from a
Oh,
stroke. And he had been teaching a Sunday school lesson at church. So I don't know if that's where that anger came from, but he had a temper, and you didn't see it often, but then bam, it would blow up. And I can remember having nightmares where this is going to tie back into what you were saying earlier, where I was hearing, it was like God was yelling at me from the sky, and I was running, and I was trying to escape, and I could not escape this booming voice. I could not tell you to this day what he was saying to me, but I was like, I was just in fear. It goes back to me kind of, we all look to our parents, particularly our dads, as sort of this godlike figure when we're toddlers, up until a
yeah.
certain point in life, when we're like, the bubble finally bursts, and we're like, wait,
He's just a
they got some
guy.
problems too.
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, so I can really identify with some of the things you were saying along those lines. Jessica, why don't you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing now and about your books? That's one thing that we have in common also, that I like to write. And I'm self-published 3 books, and but I want to hear more about your work, and I want the listeners to hear about your work and some of your books, and tell us about that, about your ministry now.
Uh, that is, it's so interesting how it came to be. I went to seminary to learn. I didn't want to be a minister. I didn't,
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to get a master's in theology. That's it. I just wanted to learn it all for myself, which my husband's head almost exploded when I said that to him, because it's not a cheap way to learn. And there was no real job on the other end of it, or so I
Mm-hmm.
thought. But while I was in seminary, I tripped over spiritual direction, which is something that I didn't even know existed. And I needed a 1 credit class to fill in a space one time. And there was an intro to spiritual direction. And so I figured I'll take that, whatever it is. And
Uh-huh.
I loved it. And I thought, oh, and so that added another year onto my studies. And so I did get a certificate in spiritual direction while I was there. And I do that on the side. It is not a profession that's going to pay the bills, for sure. And I love it, but I love it because it's just sitting with people and walking with people through their journey with God, and so it's not counseling in the sense that, I was talking about earlier. I'm not a psychiatrist or
Right.
psychologist. It's just sitting with people and holding the space for them to have a place to talk about their walk with God.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that. And that also informs my writing. And what happened for me with my writing is that I've used writing my whole life as a therapeutic tool. I mean, I didn't know I was doing that at the time, but it really, poetry and just journal writing has always been very important to me to help me along my path. And I always thought I was going to be the great American novelist. I was an English major in
Mm-hmm.
college and took all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of writing classes. And my first book was published the year before I went into seminary. I was about almost 15 years clean when I finally got to the point where, okay, I need to do this. And, you've been talking about it for years. Let's do it. And the chaplain that I mentioned earlier, I was talking to him about it. And he didn't edit or do anything for me, but it was a daily meditation book that I wrote. He just was on the receiving end of each entry that I did. And that was helpful to me because it made me accountable. Like I knew if I wasn't sending him more entries, he'd eventually go, "Hey, you haven't been sending me anything." Cause like, and so that kind of put a light under my butt, so to speak, to do that. And so that was published in 2014. And then I went to seminary and started to learn and really learn how to research and write and seek after the things I wanted to write about. And that's where I tripped over the idea. I shouldn't say tripped over. I tripped over spiritual direction. This idea was given to me. I was sitting in Intro to New Testament. So it was only my second class that I had. And we had just gone over the book of Revelation. And most people know that book just from the name of it. And they think, oh my God, end of the world, and it's a hard book to study. It's hard to learn. And there's a lot of different ideas about what it means. But one of the things that my Intro to New professor shared with us was that he was an academic. He wasn't a minister. He was strictly a PhD. And so he came at everything academically and historically. And he shared with us, he said, there's one idea about this book that will probably shock a lot of you, which is that this wasn't about the end of the world at all. It was really a symbolic writing about Rome and Rome's occupation of the Jewish people. And that was the first time I had ever heard that in my life. And I went, huh? This could be about something other than what everybody in church says it's about. Huh. And I sat with that for a while. And meanwhile, I was reading the Gospel of John for my own spiritual walk. And second to last class of Intro to New Testament, I had this thought in my head. I was sitting there and I thought, what if when Jesus was speaking symbolically, because he spoke in metaphor and symbol all the time. I thought, what if when he was speaking about his second coming, he didn't actually mean for the whole world at one time? He was speaking metaphorically about returning just for me. And when that thought came into my head, I had a memory of when Jesus came to me, which he did, and I had pushed it away. I had pushed it away because I ran away from him when he came to me. And I was so full of shame and regret that I did not turn to him in that moment. It was about 6 years before I got into recovery. And I was standing outside of a party smoking a cigarette. And it was, it was a freezing cold January night. And I was looking up at the stars, angry at God, like I always was. And I was yelling at God and asking him when it was going to be my turn. When was I going to have the life I wanted? Which I didn't even know what I wanted, but that's what I was yelling. And I knew it with every ounce of my soul, my whole being, that if I turned and looked to my left, Jesus was standing right next to me. Like not an apparition, like physical Jesus. I could turn and hug him if I wanted to. And I immediately got terrified and ran into the party. Like I turned to my right and ran into the party, never looked back. And then I was living in hell for 6 years until I found recovery. I mean, I literally was at that point completely separated. And when I had that memory, when I was sitting in New Testament and I had that thought, what if when Jesus was speaking that he was going to come back just for us? And then I had the memory of what I had done, or so I thought, I had run away from him. I had written my own ticket to hell is basically what I was thinking. I started to think about what happens now. Now that I'm sitting here and I'm seeking him and I'm learning about all these things, and it started to percolate this idea in me about becoming born again, which is what I was reading in the Gospel of John at the same time, where Jesus sits with Nicodemus and he says, unless a man is born again, he cannot be born into the kingdom of heaven. And, and that wonderful conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started studying that, and it became my thesis. And I coined the phrase, I haven't been able to find it anywhere else, but eschatology, which is, as you know, the study of the end times,
Mm-hmm.
I coined the phrase personal eschatology,
Hmm.
which would be the
Okay.
study of my own end and how
Uh-huh.
I must end in order, I must die and be reborn, that piece, seed of wheat that drops to the ground and dies. It must happen
Mm-hmm.
before I can follow Jesus the way I'm meant to follow him. I must be born again, because anything that I carry into that, it's going
Mm-hmm.
to have to die. It's going to have to be chopped off and removed, and I'm going to have to change. And what I discovered in writing this, and then I did write the thesis and I turned it into this book that I have now, what I learned and I continue to discover is that I must continue dying as long as I'm human. I
Yeah.
must continue dying over and over
Mm-hmm.
and over to these pieces of my human self that are getting in the way
Right.
of my
Yeah.
relationship with Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I mean, I have different chapters that are set up in here about, dying to perfect knowledge, Jessica. Like I have to
Uh-huh.
die to that perfectionism. I have to
Uh-huh.
die to thinking that I'm the best one in recovery. I have
Uh-huh.
to die to all that selfish behavior, on and on and on and on. There's always going to be something. And that's actually a beautiful thing, because that knowing that there's always going to be something to die to keeps me reliant on Jesus, because I know without him, I'll never see it. I'll never,
Mm-hmm.
because he's the one who tells me the truth. What he might use my sister when I
Mm-hmm.
can't look directly at him, he's going to use my
Right.
sister because he knows I can see her. Or
Yeah.
he's going to use the people in the room that first meeting I went to. He's going to use
Mm-hmm.
those people because he knows I still can't look directly at him. But now I can. Like now I'm in this place where I'm like, okay, Jesus, bring it on. What
Right.
do you have to show me? And so that's the writing, like these two books, my two books are out there for sale now, but
Mm-hmm.
this is the writing ministry that I feel that's like right now, as we're talking about it, I can feel my blood like circulating through my veins. I'm
Mm-hmm.
so like, I feel like this is so my purpose to
Uh-huh.
just keep writing more and more and more about this, and learning, I should say too, learning more and more and more about this,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I certainly know. Somebody asked me when I got my master's degree, they're like, "How do you feel now? You feel like a master?" And I said, actually, what I feel like is I've learned how much I'm never going to know, because
Right. Yeah.
when
Yeah.
you're studying for something, like there's so many different things to read and be
Uh-huh.
taught, and I mean, I could be in school for the rest of my life,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I
You
still won't
know,
know.
that's part of what keeps me going is my curiosity and just like trying to learn new things and continue to grow as a person. Otherwise life gets boring, right?
Absolutely,
But
yeah.
so do you have copies of your book with you that you can show us, or you have them
Yeah,
up
I
there?
do. I'm trying to. Well, this one says not for resale because it's the first
Okay.
one.
Okay.
But this is what the cover looks like, just not with
Right.
that
Okay.
line there.
Okay.
That's higher powered, and then
Uh-huh.
this one is the first one. This is called. It's kind of hard to see.
Oh, dewdrops. Yeah.
Dewdrops,
I
morning
like the cover.
meditations.
Yeah,
Yeah,
real cool.
this the actually see that cat there behind me.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Right there. That's
Uh-huh.
Daisy. She was my first cat, and I named her Daisy because they were my favorite flowers. She was another reason I never killed myself. So that's
Oh,
why
wow.
she gets a portrait over top of me.
Uh-huh.
When after my sister told me that, I had another momentary suicidal place that I kind of fell into.
Mhm.
And Daisy was my cat at the time, and she was my first cat as a grown up. She was my
Mhm.
first pet
Mhm.
that was just mine. And I was literally sitting on my couch contemplating, how am I going to do this so that, it can just be as clean as possible.
Mhm.
And I know it's weird things you think when you're going through that. And I know animals don't talk to us. Okay, I'm aware of that. I'm not a
Right.
crazy person, but I literally feel like she walked in the room and she put her hands on her hips, or she put her little paws on her hips, and she said, "Well, what about me? Who's going to
Uh,
take care of me?"
uh,
Like that literally is what I felt from her.
uh-huh.
And that's it. I didn't, after that, I got the counselor, and
Hmm.
you already know the rest of the story. So,
Yeah, pets can really have a healing effect. And yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I agree with that.
absolutely.
I had dogs and cats as pets growing up. Um,
I'm sure there were some hamsters and guinea pigs or something else in there too, right? We had like
uh,
a little farm in our house. Yeah.
I had turtles.
Yep. Yeah.
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 Oh, I know what I was going to say about the journaling. The first book I published um, was it started out as a journal, and I did
Yep.
not know I was going to make it a book. And
Yeah.
so, um, talk to us just a little bit about meditation and how that's helpful to you, and how, because isn't that, I mean, that's part of one of your books, right? So, yeah,
Yeah.
talk to us about that a
It
little bit.
Meditation to me, it's changed over the years. When I first got into recovery, the 11th step of most recovery programs speaks directly to prayer and meditation and how
Hmm.
important they are on a daily basis. It's a discipline that I find to be not a discipline. It's one of the greatest of life's gifts to me. Um, and it started out very slow for me because I had a hard time sitting still, which I
Mm-hmm.
think most people have, but
Yeah.
especially addicts. We want to just keep going and give me the book to read so that I can give you the right answers. That's
Uh,
sort of
uh,
the mindset. And what I learned in seminary was this meditate form of meditation called centering prayer, where you find a word, try to make it a one syllable word that makes you think of God. Anytime that you say it makes you think of your higher power, whatever that is, whether it's peace or love or God. I use the word God because that makes me think of God.
mhm,
um, and you sit for, you do what is called a sit. It's very sort of, Buddhists do this a lot,
mhm, mhm.
where you just sit for 20 minutes. And anytime that you not really emptying your mind, you're
Mhm.
just quieting your
Right.
mind.
Yeah.
And anytime that you notice, because your mind will wander. You are human. Your
Mhm.
mind is going to wander. This is part of the meditation.
Yeah.
As soon as you recognize it, you drop whatever that thought is, even if it's a good thought. Like, even if
Mhm.
I'm like, I'll come up with a lot of great, perfect book titles or wonderful beginnings to poems, or,
Mhm.
whatever. They'll start to, sort of, percolate in there. And it doesn't matter how good I think it is, I drop it and I pick up the word God again. And it's 20 minutes of my life, or however many minutes you choose, that where I am completely 100% dedicated to God.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
what happens, and I thought this was such a goofy idea, but it actually happens, that out there in the world, I'll never forget the first time it happened. I was driving to work, and I'd probably been practicing this type of meditation for about, I don't know, I want to say about 6 months, right? And I'm
Mhm.
driving to work, and this guy cut me off on the road. And I was on the highway, and it was in a dangerous spot. And I immediately went, of course, my reaction was, I'm going to yell at that guy, or I'm going to make a face or something. And immediately I thought, God, like, my brain did it for me,
Uh-huh.
because I had been training my brain
Mhm.
all along to drop whatever and just go to God.
Uh-huh.
And it was, I'll never forget. I got to work and I called my professor, and I never called my professors unless, it was for a test or something, and I
Mhm.
called her. I'm
Mhm.
like, you're not going to believe what just happened. I was so excited, but it really does work. And it
Uh-huh.
helps to keep, like, I never used, I mean, you can tell I like to talk, right? Just from this conversation.
Uh,
I never used to be able to sit still or quietly. And the relationship, and this is one of the last things I'll probably say in this conversation because it's the most important. My relationship with God is more important to me than anything else in the whole world.
mhm.
How dare I not spend 20 minutes with him every day where it's just me and God? I would
Yeah.
never not do that for a friend.
Mhm.
Like we make such a big deal about, oh, I don't have time to meditate. Really?
Right. Yeah.
Really? Can you afford not to meditate? That's how
Mhm.
I look at it.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
it's an absolute necessity. This is my time to get right, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anything else you'd like to say to the listeners? Um,
You know what? The only thing I'll just say is, a lot of times things come to people after these types of conversations.
mm, mhm.
There's a contact form on my website. If you have questions about anything that I've said, my website's very easy. It's jessicalmorris.com. It's just my name with my middle initial in there. And so there's information on there about my books, about spiritual direction. There's information about me on there. And like I said, there's the contact form. I encourage people to get in touch with me because I know this is not ever something that anybody can do alone. And
Mhm.
if your first outreach is just sending me something on a contact form and that's enough. Like just reach out to, if it's not me, reach out to somebody. If you're listening, just don't try to do it by yourself because it's not going to work.
I know. That's a
Yeah.
great message in and of itself, right there. That we do tend to quite often, most of us, to isolate and to try to work all these problems out on our own, and we don't want to open up to others. And that's not how we were designed. We were designed to
Right.
we heal best, and we all need healing, and we heal best, in community with others. So
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, reach
Yeah.
out and look for those opportunities to be a part of a group of people, even if it's just a very small group, or you just got to start out with just one person that can help you. But yeah,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Even Jesus says that where two or more are gathered. Sometimes it's
that's
only
right.
two.
Yeah.
It's just, you can't, it's just by yourself. See, the counselor and that I went to used to call denial. He always used to say denial stands for don't even know I am lying. So when I'm by myself, I'm never going to know the truth because
Hmm.
I'm so stuck in my own.
That's right. Yeah.
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 Quite often we can't see the forest for the trees, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well, Jessica, wow, I've really enjoyed the conversation. It's been great getting to know you, and we have so many things in common. And I've just really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the conversation. I know the listeners have as well, and I look forward to continuing it again sometime because. There's so many things you said that I was just flooded with thoughts and I couldn't capture it all. So I'm sure we can revisit this another time.
Oh, I would love that. You're so easy to talk to. Like a couple times I even forgot that we were doing a recording. So
Yeah.
anytime, really, I'm always willing to talk about this stuff because that's how we heal.
All right. Well, thanks again. I appreciate you being a guest on the show.
Thank you, Daryl. It's been great being with you.